This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
At least 7 terrorists are killed and an officer wounded in a shootout near Cairo. President Tshisekedi agrees on a coalition government with Kabila in the DRC. And Ethiopia's government appeals for $1.3 billion to handle humanitarian needs. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. Me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories and others in just a moment. But first, Ramanyang with today's business headlines. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Well, in Zimbabwe, it's trying to entice foreign investors back with an option of 100% control of platinum mines. And we'll tell you why commercial banks in Kenya wants to keep anti-money laundering laws exactly as they are. The details of those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And let's begin the bulletin in Egypt, where 7 gunmen have been killed and a police officer injured in a shootout. The incident occurred at a security checkpoint in the country's Giza province. According to the Interior Ministry, the gunmen, said to be terrorists, were planning to carry out attacks to provoke chaos. Let's get more now on this story. CGTN's Adel Mahroui is in Cairo for us. Adel, 7 gunmen killed, a police officer injured in an exchange of fire at a security checkpoint near Cairo. What is the latest on that?
The security forces have been chasing a group of terrorists that belong to a group that calls itself HASM. HASM is believed to be one of the armed groups that is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. Its members have been, in several court cases, proven to belong to the Muslim Brotherhood, who have turned violent after the 2013 ouster of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi. According to the police statement, the official statement that was released this morning, police forces have gathered intelligent information pointing to the whereabouts of these groups. As they started to narrow down their scope of search, they have established several security checkpoints around the neighborhoods until they confine the exact location of such a group. At one of these checkpoints, according to the statement, a suspicious white truck approached the checkpoint, and as soon as it approached it, they started opening fire at the security forces. In a quick response from the police forces, they have returned the crossfire. The result was 1 injury from the police side and 7 killed from the militant groups or the terrorist groups. And the police has not yet released the details of the information of those 7 terrorists.
Adel, where exactly did the shootout take place, and do the terrorists belong to any specific group? Do we know?
Well, the terrorists themselves have not claimed such an incident. Usually in such a failed attempt from any organization against security forces, they tend to not claim responsibility for the attempted attack. Rather, when they inflict high casualties on the security side or even the civilian side, we would usually hear about some group that would claim responsibility. HASM is well known to belong to the Muslim Brotherhood. It is actually one of the groups that have had quite an activity within the Egyptian capital in Greater Cairo, and they have claimed responsibility for numerous attacks against police forces in the Egyptian capital, usually in populous city. Their group is also known to take shelter among populous residential areas. They plan their attacks. They're usually cautious before holding any attack, but it seems that this time they were not prepared for the sudden security approach to their neighborhood and the sudden establishment of the security checkpoints at the entrances and the exits of their neighborhood on the outskirts of Greater Cairo.
So, Adel, there has been quite some insecurity, particularly in the Sinai region here. So what is the government doing to help curb insecurity generally in the country?
The government is on its highest alert. In terms of national security, there is a state of emergency that is renewed almost every 3 months by the Egyptian president nationwide. And this state of emergency is the main reason for it is to have and empower the government personnel, the police and military to be more efficient in the counter-terrorism operation that is ongoing nationwide. With such an emergency state, the police forces have the ability to arrest suspicious militants or any suspects in general and intervene prior to a judicial permit, which would take time, and therefore at the specific time many terrorists might flee the scene. So that's in terms of what is going on legally. Security-wise, the state is on its highest alert, and the Sinai military operation since February 2018 has been ongoing tirelessly, scanning the entire Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptian Air Force is almost in the sky over the Sinai 24 hours, 7 days a week to report and scan any suspicious movements on the ground. But still, when it comes to populous cities, and these are the attacks that we've seen in the past couple of months, that these terrorist groups would attack within the civilian areas, within the populous residential areas, which comes to be a bit harder to inspect, especially when they take a hideout, which is basically an apartment in a regular building. So it is not as discoverable as their headquarters or their strongholds in the Sinai Desert or in the Western Desert as well. So it becomes quite challenging for the police forces. And what is going on is basically anyone who's carrying a gun now is becoming a threat. Any person with some information on the internet to create an explosive device is becoming a threat. So it is quite challenging for the Egyptian security forces who say that they're doing their best.
Adel Mahroui with an update there from Cairo. Thank you. Let's now go to the DR Congo, where the country's recently elected President Felix Tshisekedi has agreed to form a coalition government with his predecessor, Joseph Kabila. The joint government aims to preserve the historic peaceful transfer of power, strengthening peace and stability of the country. President Tshisekedi has not been able to push through his choice for prime minister due to lack of majority backing in the National Assembly. The stalemate has affected his ambitions of reforming the Central African country. Well, let's get more now on this story. I'm joined on the line by Chris Ochamringa. He's joining me on the line from Kinshasa. Chris, DR Congo's recently elected President Felix Tshisekedi and his predecessor Joseph Kabila have said they had decided to form a coalition government following talks. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, I just seen the document this morning about the agreement that you just mentioned, and they call it historic. It's going to help improve the development of this country. But the sticky issue in all this is the appointment of the prime minister. Now, under DRC law, the party with the majority seats in parliament is the one that selects, gets the prime minister who is going to run affairs. He's a very important person, the leader of government business, and he wields a lot of power. But President Tshisekedi had someone in mind, but then the members of the Common Front of Congo, the coalition affiliated to former President Joseph Kabila, had someone else. So there's been this statement for all this time. And in order to appoint the prime minister and thereafter the cabinet, I think they came to an agreement that this is the best way forward to avoid this statement from dragging on. So that's really what's happening in the DRC.
Chris Ochamringa joining us there from Kinshasa, and apologies for the technical hitch on that line. Let's now go to Somalia, where a car bomb explosion has left 4 people dead in the capital, Mogadishu. 9 others have been wounded following the attack. The scene of the attack is close to the presidential palace. The Islamist group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the attack. The group is fighting to overthrow the internationally backed government in Somalia. Meanwhile, in neighboring Kenya, a high court has put the Kenya Airport Authority's case against aviation workers on hold to allow for dialogue. The Airport Authority filed an application to deem the strike by aviation workers on Wednesday illegal. A committee appointed by the country's cabinet secretary is handling deliberations. The committee will submit a report on the deliberations within 30 days. Union workers organized a strike on Wednesday, disrupting air travel at the country's main airport. Workers protested against alleged unfair hiring practices, poor remuneration, and flights have since resumed. Leaders from the African Great Lakes region are pushing for the voluntary repatriation of some refugees, seen as a lasting solution to the continent's refugee crisis. After 3 days of talks, regional ministers in charge of refugees agreed that as many refugees as possible should be repatriated. They also called for better integration of refugees in host countries. According to the United Nations, 11 million people in the region have been uprooted from their homes due to conflict and insecurity. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga is attending the meeting in Kampala, Uganda.
Leaders are gathered here in Kampala to try and find a solution to the refugee crisis in Africa. Uganda is one of several countries pushing for a voluntary return of refugees to their countries of origin.
In Uganda, we have now over 1 million refugees. To integrate all of them into Ugandan society is an uphill task. It may not be very possible. What we would pray is, can we create situations in the countries of origin that are conducive for return? That is the desire of this international conference that is taking place here.
However, leaders accept that those who cannot be repatriated need to be better integrated, and they are asking the donor community to commit more resources towards resettlement plans.
Yes, we continue to keep our open door policy, but the refugees place a big burden on the resources that are available. So the international community must shoulder its share of responsibility and accept that they must continue to support.
Uganda is home to more than 1 million refugees, largely from neighboring South Sudan, Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The leaders here believe if the proposals are adopted, they will help secure the rights and protection of refugees in Africa's Great Lakes region and ease the crisis. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Hundreds of lawyers in Algeria have joined protests calling for President Abdelaziz Bouteflika to step down. They also called on authorities to postpone the upcoming election and set up a transitional government. Protests initially started calling for President Bouteflika not to seek a fifth term. Bouteflika is taking part in the upcoming presidential election. The protests are the biggest since the 2011 Arab Spring.
No to stepping over the voice of the people. The voice of the people is always right. They will not ignore the constitution.
Ethiopia is appealing to the international community for $1.3 billion in order to cater for its 2019 humanitarian needs. The request, made in collaboration with the United Nations, seeks to support over 8 million people across the country. Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Representatives of international donor communities and organizations. Ethiopia is asking for their support because the number of people who need humanitarian assistance in the country has increased from 7.9 million in 2018 to 8.3 million people this year.
The total resource required to address these 8.3 million food and non-food beneficiaries is estimated at $1.314 billion, of which $600 million is required for emergency food assistance. The remaining 714 million USD is for non-food component.
Ethiopia also hosts 900,000 refugees who mostly come from neighboring countries like South Sudan, Eritrea and Somalia. While the country may not have experienced its usual severe droughts in 2018, it suffered from regular internal conflicts which led to the displacement of over 3 million people. The United Nations says without urgent funding, life-saving operations will cease at the end of March.
Millions are still reeling from past year's droughts. Each year, we can additionally expect to have in excess of 2.5 million cases of moderate acute malnutrition and 300,000 cases of severe acute malnutrition. I cannot stress enough that this is not the time for business as usual.
This is the 20th humanitarian appeal that Ethiopia's Commissioner for Disaster Management, Mitiko Kasa, has made in the past years. He says the country seeks a durable solution.
Now it is time for the government, for humanitarian development partners, to move away from the dependency on humanitarian aid appeals, to invest in both humanitarian development intervention areas through multi-strategic resilience plan in order to sustain livelihood and build the resilience of communities and nations.
In 2018, the international community mobilized nearly $600 million towards Ethiopia's disaster and humanitarian plans, while the Ethiopian government itself raised $342 million. While pledging its commitment to assist Ethiopia, the African Union is urging the state to ratify the Kampala Convention, a continental treaty that will assist Ethiopia easily mobilize support and solidarity from member states for victims of internal displacement. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And we still have more news for you here on the program. To stay with us.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
We've come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Director General of the World Health Organization has urged residents in the Ebola-stricken areas of Katwa and Butembo to cooperate with healthcare workers. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus made the remarks upon his arrival in the DRC capital, Kinshasa. He is in the DRC to assess the efforts being made to contain the disease. CGTN's Chris Oshamringa has more.
The visit of the World Health Organization chief is aimed at evaluating the response to the Ebola outbreak and strengthening relations between the global health body and the new DRC president, Felix Tshisekedi. According to the health ministry, 569 people have died of Ebola in the DRC since last August. Healthcare workers have managed to cure 304 patients. Most of the cases have been recorded in Katwa and Butembo city, where violence and resistance from local communities have hampered the prevention efforts. The head of the World Health Organization is calling for more cooperation from locals to end the outbreak.
Community should believe that there is Ebola in Katwa and Butembo, and they should also believe that they have responsibility and they should own and address this problem, because they should not lose their friends, their family, and their children.
This is the 7th visit that Dr. Ghebreyesus has made to the DRC. It comes a week after unidentified gunmen attacked 2 treatment centers in North Kivu province. He is set to visit treatment centers in Butembo and Katwa to check the progress made in tackling the outbreak. The WHO has appealed for more funds to help bring the swift end to the disease. This is the 10th Ebola outbreak recorded in the DRC and the worst yet. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
To Burkina Faso, where UN officials say the country is facing an unprecedented humanitarian emergency. Intercommunal fighting and armed groups have triggered the internal displacement of 70,000 people. Violence coupled with long-term food insecurity is sparking fears that the situation may deteriorate as the dry season looms ahead. Experts predict 9.5 million people across the Sahel region will be critically food insecure during the lean months from June to August. CGTN's Laura Walubengo brings us more.
Burkina Faso is facing unprecedented levels of internal displacement. Armed groups and intercommunal clashes have forced thousands to flee, mostly within the past 3 months.
This is absolutely not enough. The humanitarian community, together with the government, appeals for $100 million in an emergency plan to provide the humanitarian assistance and protection for 940,000 people in Burkina Faso. So I appeal to the international donor community to provide the financial resources now. We need to provide life-saving assistance and protection to these people. But we also need to act now because we need to prevent the crisis from deteriorating. So we need to act now.
The UN has already dispersed $4 million to those hit hardest, but more is needed to counter the unfolding insecurity. Combined with long-term food shortages, the country risks sliding into further violence.
So it is intercommunal clashes between communities, and laid over that is this emergence of armed groups, which are fighting each other, fighting government forces and attacking civilians. That has escalated in the second half of last year, and really it took off at the beginning of this year with some very violent clashes in the beginning of January.
In 2018, President Kabore declared a state of emergency in a third of the country's provinces. The army has stepped up operations, but rights activists are wary. They're accusing the army of arbitrary arrests and extrajudicial killings.
I am here in Burkina Faso, which is facing an unprecedented humanitarian emergency due to armed attacks and intercommunal violence. During the last 2 months, more than 70,000 people had to flee their homes and are here to find shelter. Some of these women faced enormous atrocities while being on the move to flee violence.
4.2 million people are displaced across the Sahel due to escalating violence. Militant groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL operate across the border in Niger and Mali. Last year in Burkina Faso, unknown militants perpetrated attacks in the east and the capital, Ouagadougou. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
The 151st Arab League Foreign Ministers meeting has concluded in Cairo. The gathering saw several significant side meetings, including discussions to counter Iran's influence in the Arab world. The Egyptian capital has also witnessed the establishment of countering Israel's political expansion in African Committee.
Calls from Algeria and Iraq to reinstate Syria and the Arab League have went in vain. Following the foreign ministers' meeting in Cairo, Secretary General Ahmed Abul Ghait stressed that no official requests have been made during the meetings.
The issue hasn't been discussed at all, whether through a document or a motion. All that has been done is a general discussion.
The Cairo talks have seen the usual Arab stances towards the conflicts in Libya, Yemen and Syria. Statements of full support for a people's-led political solution to each country. But no practical steps have been taken. Foreign ministers focused more on foreign influence in the region. On the sidelines of the meetings, the Special Committee on Iran's influence in Arab nations condemned Iran's support to Houthis in Yemen and interference in Syria and Lebanon. The League has also seen the birth of a new side committee focusing on Israel's growing relations in Africa.
Concerning the Israeli penetration in Africa, we've reached many recommendations which I see are extremely positive. There is a call for a routine meeting for the directors of African affairs in Arab foreign ministries and another call for Arab ambassadors in African countries to meet frequently and report to their capitals and the Arab League.
The Pan-Arab Organization believes that the Palestinian crisis is the core conflict that is fueling instability in the region. It plans to prioritize the peace process with Israel in the upcoming Arab Summit, scheduled in Tunisia on March 31.
In 2002, the Arab League has offered Israel normalization of ties in return of peace and an independent Palestinian state. During these 17 years, Israel has been expanding its relations in the Middle East and Africa, while the peace process has frozen. So the Arab League has decided to interfere in Israel's relations, and it will begin with its ties with Africa. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, in Tunisia, the country has set dates for autumn elections. The North African nation is set to hold parliamentary elections on the 6th of October and presidential polls on the 10th of November 2019. This will be the third round of national voting since the country's 2011 revolution. A constitutional court, which would be crucial if election results were challenged, has however not been formed as yet. The previous polls held in 2014 brought to power Beji Cairo Essebsi, the country's first democratically elected president. The country's electoral body hopes to start a sensitization drive to register more youths ahead of the polls.
We know that a high percentage of non-registered people are between the ages of 18 and 23 years old. We are taking new steps for our awareness campaign. We will try to use more digital platforms. These are the official dates. They are validated by the board of ISIE. We can say that these dates are studied in a legal, constitutional and operational way. Are they consensual or not? We did not negotiate with any party.
In Somalia, a charter that will serve as a blueprint for advancing rights of women has been endorsed. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello attended the three-day convention and filed this report from Mogadishu.
The convention, a first of its kind in the country, brought together women delegates drawn from the civil society, rights organizations and business community from both Somalia and abroad. Delegates discussed the role of women in peace building and representation in government. The sessions were divided into different groups, with participants discussing ways in which women can lobby for their rights to be included in politics, justice, and the ongoing constitution review process.
The whole purpose is to come up with a women charter that will be a blueprint for to advance women's rights, how women and girls can have a justice that actually work for them, the sexual offences bill, the FGM bill, and how these different stakeholders can mobilize and put forward, move forward a strategy to implement those.
The three-day convention will culminate with the endorsement of a charter that outlines specific demands by Somali women. Top on that list include more representation in politics and leadership. It aimed at pressuring Somali authorities to increase the number of women in future decision-making process.
We are coming with specific and tangible demands and requests that basically in constitution we want this and this to happen. In election we want this and this to happen. When it comes to women protection, this is what we want. We want this bill to be passed. We are asking specific demands to the parliament.
Parliament has also been put to task to approve a pending electoral reforms bill that will enshrine the principle of a 30% gender quota in future national legislatures. During the last election cycle, Parliament failed to meet the 30% quota. The same was also noted in the formation of the cabinet as well as regional administrations.
The Constitution is yet to indicate the 30% quota of women in leadership. We expect female parliamentarians to ensure it passes and we get our rights. The ball is now in your court.
As the country gears towards democratic elections in 2020, women see this as a major milestone. For decades, clan elders had the final say in the selection process of the next representatives to Parliament. But with the popular vote planned for upcoming elections, women hope to contest for more representation in both Parliament, Senate and regional assemblies. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
South Sudan is said to have one of the world's worst rates of maternal mortality. According to the United Nations, 780 out of 100,000 women died during childbirth. However, midwives in the country are hoping to change this narrative in the midst of conflict and displacement.
In a small classroom in Juba, Grace Losio begins a lesson on what it takes to be a midwife. Many of the students here are driven by grave memories from their villages. Women who have no access to healthcare often bleed to death and babies die due to complications.
Women are getting difficulties is truly in the part of not getting health services. If they were to have the health services, if they were to have the education, if they were to have all the necessities that other people get, I believe the woman in South Sudan would feel comfortable. Don't turn the mattress, okay?
When fighting erupted in Kaljokeji town in South Sudan in 2017, tens of thousands of people poured over the border into Uganda. About 20 teaching staff and 100 students fled to Moyo in the north, where they stayed for a month. They then relocated to Juba. In 2018, 36 of those students graduated as midwives.
I feel proud to be a South Sudanese. I feel proud to help my own South Sudanese. Why? Because of the small knowledge I got. So my cry is, if all my South Sudanese women would also have the chance of getting this education, tomorrow would be great.
South Sudan has one of the world's worst rates of maternal mortality. 780 out of 100,000 women die in childbirth, according to the United Nations.
Most of the women are suffering in the community. And when we came to see, according to the history we read, in the whole of Africa, South Sudan is one of the most countries that is having high maternal mortality rate.
Losio, like much of the population, has known a life mainly marked by war. After studying nursing in Uganda, she returned to South Sudan in 2006 and began training midwives 2 years later.
I needed to help my women or my people. In fact, as a nurse or as a midwife, your whole intention is to assist, relieve pains from the mothers that you have. And as a midwife, you would really want to work hard to reduce the mortality rate of women during delivery and the mortality rate of children within the first 5 years.
More than 5 years of conflict in South Sudan has left many women on their own during childbirth. The number of post-birth deaths has, however, gone down as a result of the drive to train more midwives. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
A quick look at the stories making the headlines this hour in Africa. In Egypt, 7 gunmen have been killed and a police officer injured in a shootout. The incident occurred at a security checkpoint in the country's Giza province. According to the Interior Ministry, the gunmen, said to be terrorists, were planning to carry out attacks to provoke chaos. The country's recently elected President Felix Tshisekedi has agreed to form a coalition government with his predecessor Joseph Kabila in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The joint government aims to preserve the historic peaceful transfer of power, strengthening peace and stability of the country. President Tshisekedi has not been able to push through his choice for Prime Minister due to lack of a majority backing in the National Assembly. The stalemate has affected his ambitions of reforming the Central African nation. A car bomb explosion in Somalia has left 4 people dead in the capital, Mogadishu. 9 others have been wounded following the attack. The scene of the attack is close to the presidential palace. The Islamist group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the attack. The group is fighting to overthrow the internationally backed government in Somalia. And Ethiopia is appealing to the international community for $1.3 billion in order to cater for its 2019 humanitarian needs. The request, made in collaboration with the United Nations, seeks to support over 8 million people across the country. And that's a look at your headlines. Let's now go to Ramanyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. Zimbabwe is trying to entice foreign investors to come back with the option to 100% control its platinum mines. And we'll explore why commercial banks in Kenya want to retain the anti-money laundering laws pretty much as they are.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? when market-moving decisions are made? Who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's focus on Zimbabwe. The authorities over there have announced their intent to drop the country's 51% local ownership rule for platinum mines. And if the government does plan to deliver on this, foreigners will also be allowed to own up to 100% of platinum mining operations. Now, the change to policies introduced by the former head of state, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, aims to increase Zimbabwe's appeal to the world's top platinum producers. It also is part of a wider set of efforts to stimulate its battered economy. Zimbabwe's legislators would have to amend local ownership laws in order for these reforms to actually take effect. After South Africa, Zimbabwe is home to the world's largest known reserves of platinum group metals. Over in East Africa, commercial banks have backed the country's central bank's defense of stringent laws that aim to curb money laundering. The chairman of the sector lobby group, Joshua Oegara, says that the laws are necessary to protect the integrity of the banking system. Now, the laws require, among other things, that all financial institutions, and that covers everyone from banks to insurance companies, savings and credit cooperatives, all of them, they have to file reports to the Financial Reporting Center on daily reports on transactions above $10,000 or its equivalent in local currency, and any other transactions they may deem to be suspect. Bank executives and persons convicted of handling illicit cash face a $10,000 fine or 3 years behind bars. Institutions, on the other hand, which facilitate such transactions, could be fined up to $200,000 if found guilty. Now, some economists are warning that it may still be a while before South Africa's economy performs optimally again. Africa's most industrialized country grew by just 0.8% last year. That's a marked decline from 2017's just as dismal growth number of 1.4%. Statistics South Africa released the GDP data for the last quarter of 2018, and it painted a grim picture of an economy that's not firing on all cylinders. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with the details.
Some economists believe the economy is on the mend, but others are saying it's still in critical condition. It's been just over a year since Cyril Ramaphosa took over as president. Since then, there's been progress in improving governance, but there's been little success in reviving the economy.
So if you look at the growth in South Africa, it still remains fairly modest into the start of 2019. We think at the moment that the consumer is generally under a little bit of pressure. We know that consumer income has been struggling. Salary increases are fairly modest. Bonus payments have been cut. We also know the consumers facing some price pressures in terms of fuel, interest rate hikes that went up in November, electricity price that will go up in the middle of the year.
Corporate South Africa is also feeling the pain, but it's the small business sector that's bearing the brunt of the slow growth. High electricity costs and unstable supply have forced hundreds of businesses to close shop. Others are struggling to hold on.
Despite several efforts by government to create a more business-friendly environment, there's still way too many barriers for small enterprises, and this too is hampering efforts to create new jobs.
We need to put in the billions of money that are required to fund smaller businesses so that people can get loans that are at a rate that is better. Because today when you go to government-type agencies, you find that it's hugely difficult, especially for people who are black, to access funding. The real issue is you need to have more people buying things in South Africa. That's all there is to it. We need to have more people taking loans from banks, borrowing money to buy cars, because we need to be selling more cars. We need to be selling more toothbrushes.
Unemployment remains stubbornly high at 27%. Youth unemployment is worse, and thousands of job losses are still pending in the mining sector. While Ramaphosa has been praised for his crackdown on corruption, he still doesn't enjoy enough support to make the bigger, more critical changes to grow this economy.
What has been weighing heavily on the economy also that doesn't usually attract a lot of attention is the impact of industrial action that has escalated in recent months as a result of the contestation for power amongst trade unions ahead of the general election in May.
Ministers have been playing musical chairs in the last decade. Only a handful are new. It's hoped there will be more stability in government after the election so that key policies aimed at stimulating this economy can be fully implemented. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Egypt's finance ministry has announced a new debt control strategy. Basically, it's a 4-year plan that aims to cut the country's public debt levels, which currently stand at over 100% of GDP. CGTN's Iyasa Hakim has the details.
Coming out of 2 uprisings and terrorism that have crippled the economy, the government resorted to a process of borrowing to rebuild its economy and provide funds for public services. Public debt has reached 102% of GDP, and international debt 92% of GDP. A plan is in place to reduce the mushrooming debt.
The target is to reduce the public and external debt to 80% and to reschedule the debt repayment plan. It was short-term payments before, which puts pressure on the government to pay loans every 3 to 6 months. The government is now issuing long-term bonds, 3 years, 5 years and 10 years.
The debt control strategy is a 4-year plan, working on several levels simultaneously.
The way that they are formulating moving forward with the strategic plan is to put together some reform mechanisms. So one major concept is the inclusion of the informal market with the formal market, and that on its own should have quite an impact of about $10 billion into the economy if that is able to be implemented. A lot of other tax measures have been undertaken as well. Started to remove subsidies of the energy, subsidies of transportation, other food product. There has to be manufacturing, there has to be exports, there has to be new investments coming into the economy for us to be able to create these jobs that we need for us to be able to reduce the public debt.
But there are challenges along the way.
There are 2 other parts of this equation, variables that need to be looked at, and that is the impact of international markets such as the oil and gas market. Any increases, as we saw last year in the oil prices, has a major impact on both the public debt and the external debt. The other thing is, of course, the currency fluctuations, since Egypt has floated its pound, and hence that can be an impact as well on both public and external debt.
Most experts say the success of such program will benefit the predominantly poor population.
The money saved will be spent on health services, education and infrastructure projects. This will also lift the pressure of public debt and reduce loans from local banks that attract high interest rates. Reducing debt will also relieve the financial burden of future generations.
Experts say the public debt is high, but not at dangerous levels. However, the government insists to begin its 4-year debt control strategy before loans reach a very high level that is unattainable or difficult to repay. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Shares in MTN jumped by over 16% in trading today. That's the most in about 3 years after Africa's biggest wireless carrier announced a plan to sell assets worth over $1 billion over 3 years as part of efforts to shore up its balance sheet and exit non-core businesses. The company has agreed to sell its 53% stake, for example, in Botswana's Mascom to Zimbabwe's Econet Wireless for about $300 million. Africa's biggest telecommunications group is currently reviewing its presence in some markets alongside investments in e-commerce platforms. The Chinese telecommunications equipment maker Huawei is suing the United States over a ban it imposed on the Chinese firm's products. Huawei says that move is unconstitutional. Now, the ban derives its legal power from a provision of the National Defense Authorization Act, which was signed into law by President Donald Trump in August last year. The act bars federal agencies and their contractors from procuring Huawei's equipment or services. The lawsuit is the latest flashpoint between China and the US, even as the firm's CFO is fighting extradition next door in Canada.
Section A9 is unconstitutional in its singling out of Huawei by name, blacklisting it, damaging its reputation, and denying it any way to clear its name and escape sanction. its attack on Huawei is purposeful and punitive.
The US trade deficit is at its highest level in a decade, and that is despite an increase in tariffs pretty much across the board last year. The trade gap between the US and China has gone up to nearly $420 billion. CGTN's Owen Fairclough has been analysing the numbers released by the US Commerce Department.
It's a central tenet of Donald Trump's trade policy that deficits are bad, and the wars he fought with partners around the world were partly aimed at reducing all of that. And yet the latest numbers out of the United States show this hasn't worked out so well for the US president. The US total trade deficit hit a 10-year high in 2018, and the deficit in goods with China is also at a record high. Now, tariffs that Trump put on different partners around the world were intended to reduce these deficits, and yet consumer spending here in the United States has helped ramp up those deficits, and Trump has to be to blame for that. He imposed tax cuts that helped drive up consumer spending. So this is a US president that wants his cake but can't eat it. Those tax cuts that were given to Americans incentivized them to go out and buy goods from countries like China, and those imports helped drive up that deficit. And deficits do eat into economic growth because we subtract imports when we calculate gross domestic product. And that GDP was lower in the last quarter for the United States, suggesting those deficits were starting to cause problems for the US economy. So how important is all of this for the China-US trade deal that's supposed to end the trade war between these two countries? Well, those numbers had already been forecast. They'd been delayed by the shutdown of the government here in the United States. And we know that trade talks have been happening between these two sides. Now, China has been buying more things from the United States, products including soybeans, for example, that should help reduce that deficit. Ironically, China's argument in all of this might help because China asks, do the numbers really matter here? If we take the example of the iPhone, well, most of it is made in China, and you could argue that most of the value is created there. But iPhones are recorded as an import when they're brought back into the United States and drive up those deficits. And it's often overlooked that the US runs a very healthy trade surplus with China in services, something the US president doesn't talk about very often. So the lesson might be here, is it time to think about how we calculate GDP and deficits? Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
I'll leave you there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be taking a closer look at Zimbabwe's proposal to change indigenization rules around how platinum mines and even diamond mines, apparently, are owned. Is 100% ownership enough to actually get you investing in Zimbabwe? Some answers coming your way from Harare and plenty more at 1800 GMT. For now, though, back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And there's plenty more coming up for you. Don't go away.
It's global business. See Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's head to Uganda, where we meet Aisha Bahati, who is not your average hairdresser. She has been blind since childhood, but that has not stopped her from styling hair. With a loyal customer base, the blind hairstylist has overcome disability stereotypes. She's now passing on her skills to young women in the capital, Kampala. Here's Leon Sinyange with her story.
Aisha Bahati easily weaves her fingers through a strand of hair. At 8 years old, she lost her eyesight when she was injected with an expired drug. Despite not being able to see, she took up hairstyling.
When I lost my sight, my mother bought me a doll. That's what I started with. And when I grew older, I knew what to do with hair. It's probably a talent I have.
Bahati has worked in the salon ever since. She has no trouble attracting customers. Her clients say she does a good job.
When she does my hair, it doesn't break, and she always has a different style for me every time I come here.
And when she is not working on a customer, Bahati is busy teaching several teenage girls a few hair designs. Bahati has been styling hair for close to a decade now and says she wants to continue serving her loyal customers, but she also wants to share her skills with other young women. And they are always pleased to learn from her.
She has taught me how to plant hair, how to make a wig, and how to plant these young kids, because I came here without knowing anything, and she taught me.
Bahati enjoys hairstyling, but her resilience has also kept her going. And she is also keen on fighting the stereotypes around disability.
Other women should learn from what I do. Those that don't have any disabilities should be encouraged to work. If I can, then why can't they?
Doctors say surgery could help Bahati regain her sight. Hopefully one day she'll be able to see her handiwork. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Chibuli, Central Uganda.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead.